Hannah is spotted here with Michelle Lamy, and just pay very close attention to how they treat this woman. Shortly after, this is her backstage of A$AP Rocky, and this woman has deep connections with every single celebrity.
A$AP Rocky, Rihanna, Usher, those names are familiar to us, yes, but they all have a link to a very specific odd individual, and you may or may not have heard her name before, but we'll tell you about her today, Michelle Lamy. If you have not heard of Michelle Lamy, well, join the club. Many of us may not have heard her because she moves in the background of a lot of things, even though she is known in the fashion circles with these artists. Her ties go deep, the people that she knows is wide, and the amount of influence she has is vast. We're going to be talking about her today because the connections that you're going to see that she has will tell you some things about the people that she's friends with. Now, Michelle Lamy is an 80-year-old so-called fashion designer. She is married to a man by the name of Owens, Rick Owens to be exact, who is also a fashion designer. He is in his 60s and she's in her 80s. They met way back in the day and they got married. She was a former lawyer, but her contacts are where the real interesting things start to happen. She's really close friends with a certain individual, Marina Abramovic. And in the circle that they move in, we'll leave that to your imagination in case you know who Abramovic is. But more so, she's been caught at galas with certain individuals like the ones we named. Usher, Rihanna, and A$AP Rocky. Now, if you go to their concerts, you'll notice something very interesting. They all seem to share one trait, and that trait is a design type of choice in their layout of the concert, the stage, the clothing, and they all are stemmed from their partnership with Lamy. Now, when you look at this lady, you will see some very interesting markings on her face and rings on her fingers and dye. Henna is what's on her fingers. People might think it's like rot or something. It's not. Gold-plated teeth, and the two things that should stand out to you when you see her picture is that line on her head and the color of the outlines of her eyes. If you're familiar with the eyes thing, look no further than the animal kingdom and the pandas. You can run that rabbit hole all you want. We ain't going to talk about that because you know what that'll do? Destroy us. So we're just going to leave that for you to investigate. However, that little line on her head has very significant meaning. It is the third eye. This is what they're using. I mean, you probably heard Jay-Z talk about this before, where he's opening his inner consciousness. And this is exactly what these artists go after. It's this so-called inner conscious move to try and become one with the universe. Here comes the third eye line. There are many other symbols on her body and her work that suggest, I'm going to say suggest because, you know, many people are going to say, well, you don't know the meaning behind, that are satanic. We can look at all the people that she's been influenced with and by, and you can tell that this is exactly her motive. If you watched the concert that Rihanna had recently at the Super Bowl, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. What you see there are the symbols of satanic behavior. The reds, the pentagrams, all of it. It's there. When you look further into Mrs. Lamy's life, you find something very, very, very interesting. Aside from the artist having affiliations with Miss Abramovic, she has a very close tie to her as well. Now, what does that mean? Outside of going into Miss Abramovic's life, which we're not going to do necessarily here, you have to look at what exactly their goals are. They have these concerts and they have these galas that they host. And every one of these galas, they have some ritualistic dancing that takes place either on stage or within the confines of the crowds. They're very suggestive. And she recently had an interview, well, I can't say recently, she had an interview where she discussed how she came to be who she was. Now, in this interview, it'll tie some things in that we're going to touch on later that may make sense to you in the long run. One very interesting thing she mentioned was that her interaction with the Catholic Church did indeed shape her future. When she was a child, she went into, I guess you would call it a covenant with the Catholic Church as a child to learn the ways of the Catholic Church.
The fact that I was very young in boarding school with the nuns, even if every family was not Catholic at all, but because it was a chic place to be.
What she divulged was that the nuns were, in her words, very sexual.
Those nuns, you know, they were very sexual.
Now, we've talked before about all of the disgusting things that take place within the confines of places like the Vatican or even just any Catholic church to be exact. And you will be able to understand right off the top that a lot of deviancy takes place there. And when you understand that, and a person telling you that from a child that they were dealing with her in a certain way, I think you have now validation to prove that the Catholic Church in and of itself is not a good entity. But she went on to tell people that this is exactly where she molded herself into knowing whether or not she was straight, bi, or something else. She groomed herself into that position because of nuns that were inappropriate with her. In her mind, though, it was not inappropriate. It was completely okay. How does one get to that point? Well, you either have to be abandoned or you have to be embraced so well that you think it's normal, which is the latter with her. Along comes her second husband, and he himself is involved in that same deviancy. He says he's bisexual, and enter into a whole new realm of crazy. Everything from the symbols on her body, to the symbols on her rings, to the way she does her finger, to the lifestyle she leads and the fashions that she designs, all of it point back to one very specific thing: satanic worship. So what does that mean for the rest of the entertainment industry who she has her fingers and claws around? Remember, these are some big names that she has around her, and very big names know her. But when you look closer at what they do when she's around, you will see some interesting patterns start to develop. For some reason, when she takes her pictures, especially with them, she always has one very specific pose that she strikes with them, and it's a looking up and almost pouting to kiss them.
Somebody showing them how that played.
I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but if you want to run, again, the reason we're not going into too much detail, because the detail can lead you down to a very interesting hole that most of society frowns upon, and eventually you'll never hear about it because they won't allow it to. But if you remember carefully, because she grew up where she grew up in the church, Catholic Church, I'm going to put that in quotation, there was one individual that did that exact same thing. His name was Judas. This kissing greeting is something of what you call betrayal. Now, what happened with Judas was not a good thing, obviously, but it was orchestrated by a very different individual. Who? Satan. So you see, there is they give you symbols all the time and tell you exactly what they're doing. Some of us just don't catch it. It is a very big focus point if you really look at it correctly. Now, Miss Lamy is one very interesting because she's not fully engulfed in the satanic rituals per se in the public light. You can't really pin that on her. She keeps it very close to the vest, but this is exactly what the people who are at the helm do. They'll give you an inclination, but they won't give you all. The people below her, however, can afford to do it all they want because they're protected by who? Her. The amount of names that she knows, the people that she hangs out with, and their influence over other people is a big deal. Take Rihanna, for instance, just to start off. The kinds of crowds that she runs in is not your typical small nature. These are influential folks. She went from 0 to 100 overnight. Guess who was around the whole time? Lamy. Same thing with A$AP Rocky, who was around the whole time? Lamy. There are things that are seen and there are things that are unseen. What we don't always get to see is the unseen. In this case, you do get a little glimpse as to what happens in the background. At all these events that these big superstars throw, you will see her lurking in the background. Sometimes she'll come to the front, but the majority of the time she's working things from the back. Now, some will say, well, you're making quite a stretch and you haven't really proven whether or not she's a satanic person, individual, and all of that. Okay, well, let's get some facts on the table. If I told you that my closest associate had a gallery, okay, a art gallery, and in this art gallery, there were some questionable art pieces to the extent of the younger in compromised position, and even adults in compromised positions to the point of being not so much alive in these depictions. Would you consider me a normal, day-to-day functioning, non-violent, non-satanic individual if that was my best friend? And I would go to these events and I paint myself in the same light as that person. Would you consider me okay? I highly doubt that. So if you want proof, look no further than their associations. We all know who Abramovic is. And she has her fingers deep into just about everybody. How did she get there? She's 77, by the way. Lamy's 80. Lamy was in this long before Abramovic was. One influenced the other. Only one is really known for what they do. How did that take place? How did most people not know about Lamy? Because she moves in the background, doing everything and orchestrating it to her liking. Y'all might say, okay, and the reason I'm saying y'all might say is because I know all the devil advocates' points on this one, and I'm ready for them. Fully ready for the devil's advocate's point on this. Here is my rebuttal to anyone thinking that it might be wrong, or I might be off, or you just don't know. Too Strong is in the habit of believing what people present to you. Okay? If you present to me a certain personality and then come back later and say, well, you read it wrong. I didn't read nothing wrong, fam. You offered me a position of where you were. I looked at it, made my assumption, and you did not correct me. You told me who you were. I believed you. You can't then backtrack, even though I have records to prove that something about you ain't right. She has multiple things that look at to me and to us that does not seem wholesome. She had an event. Well, I guess you would call it an unveiling. Man, has that an understatement. In Town Square, New York. And she's waiting for it to come up. And on these billboards in the corner of the building, those big, massive 70, I think, what is that, 150 feet, almost big, tall, these massive ones, right? Her name comes across, and then a nude picture of her comes across the building. Now, I'm going to go on a limb and say, well, maybe not everybody was wanting to see an 80-year-old woman naked on the side of a building. I'm just going to go on a limb and say that. Especially children probably shouldn't see that. But why was she the one honored like that? Why? I'll tell you why. Because she is loved by these people and she is worshipped by these people. She's had her hand in everything that they do. This is their best way to honor her. It's what they do. There are other things that she has had her hand in that we cannot speak about. It is a no-no for YouTube. So we're not going to say it. However, I definitely want somebody out there who's interested in finding out, go look it up. It has to do with something that's been going around for quite some time, and she is involved in it indeed. Lastly, the artists that were named, A$AP Rocky, Rihanna, and Usher, whenever she is around, there is a certain way that these people behave. And if you look at the pictures of them, you'll find something very interesting. When they come around her, they all of a sudden become very docile, low-key, reserved, almost like they're afraid of her. To me, if you were somebody that I revered, the last thing I would be is scared of you. Unless, of course, I knew something about you that no one else knew that you could possibly do to me. You can say that might be a stretch. But as a logically thinking human being, many of us will think, why? Why would that happen? It's pretty easy. Let me equate it to a dog. You ever find when a dog is angry with you? This is the rule I've heard. It's worked every time I've tried it. There are some dogs you can't stare in the eye. What they take it as a sign of aggression. There are some dogs, if you look at them a certain way in the eye, they'll cower in fear. What's the difference between the two dogs? Rearing. One might be reared to attack, the other is reared to protect. And the two act completely different when stared in the eye. When you look at people that interact with Miss Lamy, they operate as though it's an aggressive dog. They do not stare. They don't push their luck. They know their place before her, because at any moment it could snap. People are going to say, well, she's so nice. No, you see, nice is a good cover. There are plenty of beautiful, vicious dogs out there too. I met one recently. His name is Felix. Y'all might not know who Felix is, but I met Felix before. And for the most part, I thought Felix was a cool dog, real cool, beautiful, beautiful dog. Here's the thing about Felix. Do not let his cute demeanor fool you. Felix will eat you up in a heartbeat, just like that. Why? Felix is a protector. Felix has his people. Felix don't know you. Even though you think you may know Felix, Felix don't know you. Felix gonna eat you up. All the look in the world, as handsome as that boy is, dangerous. Don't mess with that dog. Don't. That's Lamy. People might look at her and say, okay, strong will. Aggressive, yes, maybe a little bit, but I want to go pet it. Don't. Even her handlers know that. And that's exactly why they behave the way they behave around her. If we were to make a guess, I would make an assumption that she's probably one of the top dogs behind everything in Hollywood, from influence to look to money and even rituals that may happen at these galas. She's definitely an interesting character. But from what we can tell, she's following one order only, and that is the corruption of Hollywood. Yeah, I know Hollywood been corrupt for a while, but it got there because of people. She's one of them. The more we look into the story, the darker it gets. The more people around it that we see, the more crazy it gets. Many don't know, but hopefully, after this bit of information, it'll cause your curiosity button to spark, and you might go hunting and get to the bottom of what she actually does. But I warn you, when you do start down this rabbit hole, make sure you have a flashlight with you because it's a very, very dark hole.